Nothing contained in this podcast should be considered a substitute for professional medical advice. This content does not represent our respective employers and is purely the opinion of the podcast hosts. We are not your personal medical providers. Sorry, friends. So, if you have any questions or concerns or seeking advice, diagnosis, and or treatment, please seek individual, personalized advice from a healthcare provider in your area. We are not liable for any risks or issues associated with using or acting upon the information contained in this podcast. This is intended for educational and entertainment purposes only, so enjoy the ride. Welcome to Medical Media Mixer, the perfect cocktail. I'm Nicole Peniston, licensed psychologist.
I'm Tara Prisco, physician assistant. All right, so where are we in time? So we're recording this on February 3rd.
Are we in time?
The whole world, January's been like 3 months long.
It was just January 73rd, and now it's February 2nd, 3rd.
Yeah, and the whole world is blown up, and we are here being your constant in life.
I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but we are here regardless. So
we
welcome.
are. My goodness. Anything good this past weekend?
Not really, just I was home. I had more time on my hands than I anticipated, so did a bunch of research for future episodes, so that'll be fun.
Yeah, you went like nose to the grindstone on this one.
I did like 5 episodes. I was on a roll. I will say, of the 5, like 3 of them, they were things I'd like been thinking of for many moons and just finally like put it down on paper or in a Google Doc. How about you? How was your weekend?
Anthony and I, we went up to Crystal Springs, up in North Jersey.
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever been there? Yeah, it's like a nice resort type thing. So this was a sans kid weekend, which was nice. It was nice. They had like winter activities. So they had like axe throwing, they had like ice skating and like ice curling, like throwing the things, and a hot chocolate thing outside. And, you know,
did you check out their really cool wine cellar?
So I went down there, but we didn't do the tour or like the dinner with that. Yeah. But we did do the fancy restaurant La Tour, which is their 7-course like tasting menu French style.
Mm-hmm.
So, but the night before, like everything sort of closes early. So unless we're in the bar, like we were back in the room. So we put on a movie. And have you ever heard of or seen the movie The Menu?
I've heard of it. I haven't watched it, but I know the plot line. I don't know if that's a good choice after having eaten a meal.
Well, the day before we went to the whole concept of that movie is it's this, you know, tasting menu exclusive chef, whatever, you know, this many courses. Yeah, I'm not gonna spoil that one for you. But an interesting thing when you're in there in the frou-frou restaurant and thinking about that movie, it was pretty funny. So if anyone else, I'm not going to spoil it for you because the best part of that movie is not knowing what it was. Anthony just put it on. He's like, I've watched this before. Let's just watch it. So,
I mean, I've seen the preview. I kind of guessed what it was, but
yeah. So that was interesting. But yeah, it was, the food was good. It was very frou-frou and fancy and expensive. I did not do the wine flight because I was like, all right, that's pushing it a little bit.
Yeah.
But
their wine cellar is very cool, though. When I went, we did the tour, and then they did like a specialty tasting down there. It was very cool.
Yeah, that was an option. Anthony's not a drinker, so that's half the problem. It'd be just me drinking.
I mean, you just drink for 2.
And then their pool is like that cool biosphere thing.
Mm-hmm.
The only problem is on the weekend, there were a ton of people in there, so we didn't stay a whole lot of time, but we went in that pool that goes like to the outside, so it's like freezing out, like 18 degrees out, but you're in the hot pool outside, so that was neat.
Nice.
Yeah. All right, so this week we are doing a combo sort of structured episode, right?
Yeah, something a little different for our listeners. We decided that we both watched the same film, and we're both going to talk about it from our respective perspectives.
Yes. Respective perspective.
I like that. Respective perspective.
Oh, we are super corny, though.
No, we're not. I'm totally serious. Maybe we should both start off by talking about our cocktails.
Smart, since it is a joint venture. All right, why don't you tell us your cocktail first?
Even though it's a joint venture, we both have different cocktails. I will say, I saw your cocktail. And I almost made your cocktail, but then I was like, it's going to be hard to find these ingredients.
So.
The name of my cocktail is the Forever Young, and it's a pretty simple, tasty drink. It is 2 ounces of vodka, 2 ounces of lemon lime soda, 1 ounce of pineapple juice, and a pineapple wedge for garnish. You just toss it all into a glass with ice, stir it well, and go to town. I did not have my garnish, but I have the rest of the drink.
Nice. It looks very refreshing.
Mm-hmm. And what are you sipping on today?
So I have the Elixir of Immortality.
Mm-hmm.
So it calls for 1/2 ounce of this specific brand watermelon juice, Twisted Alchemy, but I actually just went to Whole Foods. And at the last second, I was almost all the way through the store. I'm like, they have to have watermelon juice in this store. And I found a little thing of watermelon juice. Otherwise, I was going to have to buy watermelon and smush it,
juice it yourself.
Juice it. 2 ounces of vodka, 1 ounce of aloe vera liqueur. So that took a lot of internet searching. I'm like, oh, great. Where am I going to find this? But I found somewhere that said Whole Foods had it. And I'm like, yes, because the Whole Foods by me has liquor. So I was able to get this aloe vera liqueur, which was pretty neat. I took a picture of some of the other ingredients in it because it's not just aloe flavored. It also has, let me see, cucumber. I don't know what eau de vie is. Lemon peel.
It's French for water of life.
Water of life. Okay. I guess water.
Whatever that means.
Lemon peel, musk melon, spearmint, sugar, and water, all in this liqueur.
I did see that when I found your cocktail. I was going to do the deep dive, and I was like, oh, that's 5 ingredients I have to go buy. I was like,
yeah. So I made one Whole Foods run. I was like, yes. And then the other juice it calls for is this specific Twisted Alchemy Persian lime juice, but I could not find Persian lime juice, so it's good old regular lime juice. Nice. And a basil leaf. So basically, you add everything except for the basil leaf into a shaker with ice, shake, strain, pour into a glass, throw a little basil leaf on top. Let me bring mine up to the camera. It is pretty colored, and it's very light, refreshing. Nice. Little basil leaf hanging in there. Now I have to use basil this week because you can't buy small amounts of basil.
Yeah, sadly. I did see that aloe vera liqueur and was thinking about buying it. So you'll have to give me the final verdict.
Yeah, it gives, obviously it's all mixed together. I would try it actually with a tonic or a soda water type thing. It with just a squeeze of lime, I think that would be really nice. I think it could be definitely used for a lot of summer drinks. Yeah. It feels like it
seems very refreshing.
I did want to comment on the name of your drink, Forever Young, because now that song is in my head.
I'm sorry.
And do you know what that song reminds me of? No. Napoleon Dynamite.
High school.
Napoleon Dynamite.
Oh. Okay, fair.
That's it.
That is kind of high school era for us. So yeah.
Anyway, all right. So on to our topic. So the movie is it's a documentary called "Don't Die: The Man Who Wants to Live Forever," and it follows this gentleman.
It's on Netflix.
It is on Netflix. It follows this gentleman, Brian Thompson, who's a self-made millionaire / influencer. So I did see some commentary, I guess, questioning his motives for this and whether it was just about the influencer stuff or whether he really did want to change his life. I'm sorry, Windows keeps telling me to restart and I don't want to. Please leave me
Windows,
alone. No. Go away.
And for those of you listening and wondering, Brian Johnson or Johnston?
Thompson.
Wow, neither of those.
Yeah.
Brian Thompson, he was actually the originator of Venmo.
Right, yes. And some other...
Yeah, it was a different name first, and then
combined
or he acquired Venmo.
Yes.
So that tells you how much money this guy's got if he's acquiring Venmo.
Exactly. So essentially, I guess he made this money, but he was still unhappy in life and his self. You see pictures of him when he was younger compared to now, and it really doesn't even look like the same person.
The weird thing about that is the person that he was doesn't look like he was wildly unhealthy or unhappy per se. It's
average
pictures,
normal person.
It wasn't like he was morbidly obese and drinking all the time. He was an average Joe, I would say.
Right. I guess maybe part of what he spoke to was he was kind of always working and not taking care of himself, sort of. So I guess that part of things.
Mm-hmm.
So basically now, this focuses on this quest to essentially live forever, or maybe not in reality live forever, but to extend his life.
Well, at one point he says he wants to live at least 200 years. So that's insanity to me.
Yeah. That's lonely. What are you going to do with life? I don't know. So he follows this protocol called Project Blueprint, and he consults with this Dr. Oliver Zolman, who is a longevity consultant, who created this protocol, and it's like a leveled program that he does. They didn't go to every step, but I'll name some of the things that he does every day. He apparently does about 100 things a day, but he does a special...
Keep in mind, this man no longer has a full-time job, so he can do 100 things.
He lives in a fancy house and literally just takes care of himself all day. First, he does a certain amount of minutes in front of one of those boxed lights. He takes 3 pills to start the day, takes his temperature. He does something called HRV therapy, something about stimulating the vagus nerve. Not sure really what that is. Then he takes 54 pills of various supplements.
As you do.
Right. He drinks the Green Giant, which looks like a green smoothie. He puts a special red light cap on his head for hair growth. He works out for an hour. Apparently throughout the day, he eats a few pounds of vegetables. I believe he was vegan.
So at this point in the movie, I am wondering, and unless I missed it in my 3 times of watching it, they never actually say how old he is. They just say that he's 40s. How much he's reduced his aging.
I'm pretty sure he's in his 40s. I'm sure we could easily figure that out.
I'm sure we could Google that, but I feel like in the movie, they never explicitly say when he started this protocol, he was X amount of years old.
Right. So, yeah, I guess he claims, I'll finish the rest of the things, but then he claims that he did reverse his biological age by 5.1 years thus far. And he has got a 0.69 rate of aging, whatever
So
that
I'm
means.
laughing because I Googled it, and the first thing that popped up is 65 years old. There's no way that man's 65 years old.
No, he's in his 40s for sure.
It's a different Brian Thompson that's 65 years old.
He's Bryan.
Oh, okay.
There you go. He does some sort of audio therapy, which I'm not really sure what that involves. And
I remember him saying it's supposed to help with his hearing.
Yeah. And then he takes another 34 pills. And he goes to bed every night at 8:30, and he averages exactly 8.34 hours of sleep a night, whatever that means.
And he has 100% sleep proficiency.
Oh, yes, you are correct. Later, we'll go into the details of some of the standout things in his protocol that he does. You do see him throughout doing also some aesthetic things. So he's doing a laser on his face. You're seeing him get injections. So he's not just improving his physical body, but he is aesthetically changing himself as well. So like the lasers that he uses are things that we use in aesthetics to help like lighten dark spots, reduce fine lines and those kind of things, and reduce hyperpigmentation. So, and he does look like he was getting injected. It's either Botox or filler. So he's doing some other things. Like he didn't magically, his face didn't change, go back in time. Like that didn't happen. Like maybe his body did, but his face, that was all a little extra.
Right. And my impression, like when you first like kind of see like an up close of him, it does look like he's had plastic surgery of some sort. Like his face looks young, but it doesn't look naturally young.
My feeling is that he actually looks like in a movie what you would have in some futuristic world where people like live in sleep pods or something. And like, I don't know, he's got this otherworldly look to him.
Yes, he definitely seems a little alien-esque, which off topic, but not off topic. I don't know if you saw in the news. I think it was 2 days ago, a child died when a hyperbolic chamber exploded.
Yes. I don't know what
he doesn't say that he uses, but I bet he does.
I'm sure he does it all.
Hyperbolic, sorry.
Yeah, hyperbaric.
And he's 47 years old.
47. Yeah. So if he reduces himself, he's 42 in theoretic years.
Theoretic years. Dog years.
Yeah. We're going to make a new scale for him. Yeah. I'm sorry. So they do sort of flash in and out of different parts of his life to give you a little perspective of how he got here. So it showed that basically he was burning the candle at both ends, working, and he had some mental health struggles. He did end up, he had like problems with work-life balance. He had a spiritual crisis where he was a
You're just
Mormon.
reading right off of my notes right now, aren't you?
Well, yeah. It's all your notes, my notes are all together, so it's confusing. So he was a Mormon and he was married and he had quite a few children, but he ended up divorcing the wife and then really losing connection with all of his children except for one who recently came to live with him. And that's shown in the documentary. And you think he's about 17 because they're talking about him graduating, going off to college.
Mm-hmm.
And he's also following some of these lifestyle changes that his father's doing. So they feature that throughout. And, they do talk about how he does have this big social media sort of presence, and he has basically somebody who curates that for him. He doesn't have like a big company, but he has like an assistant. That girl with the accent, she was kind of fun. I don't know how she got pulled into all this, but she helps him, runs his
she needs her
stuff.
own documentary because it's fascinating. Like for a little while I was waiting to like hear that they're dating, and that's why she's doing it, but
I know
it didn't come up.
I know they did talk about him going on a date with somebody at some point, but
they talk about his ex, which I will touch on briefly.
Yeah, you'll definitely talk about that, like his ex-wife, his ex-girlfriend, problems that he had. And the question, I guess, is, what he went so extreme, like what did that accomplish? What does that all mean? That you'll definitely get into the psychological end of things. But some of the bigger themes that we'll get into with the specifics is he does some of these big protocols, and one of which is like sort of a bonding experience between his own father, himself, and his son. They do this plasma exchange. So
they get on the plasma bus.
Right. So each younger person gives their plasma to the next line. So his son gives to him and he gives to his father. We'll get into the details of what that's about. But it was interesting how they weave that in as some sort of bonding thing. His father didn't appear to be on the, super healthy scale. He's just like a average sort of older man. So it's interesting how they weave that in. And toward the end of all of this, you kind of see these extremes he's gone into, but it feels very like he's just in his house by himself doing all this stuff. Like it feels very weird. Like he lives in this big fancy house and people come into him, but he doesn't seem to go out much. But the very end,
and there's one part before you get to the very end where there's like a bunch of different podcast, radio hosts, things kind of bashing him a little bit, or just kind of talking about his journey. And one of them makes a really good point. It says, well, what is the point of extending your life if you're not truly living each day? Like he's got such a strict regimen that it doesn't allow for organic joy or surprise or doing something outside the box. And so it's kind of like, well, what is the point of all this then if you can't really live?
I know. I mean, that's how I felt throughout it. Like, it's got to be lonely. I mean, when the son is around, at least he has that, but the son's going off to college now, so he's going to be back where he started. But the part I felt good about in the end is that he started this whole movement and it became a thing. So he started these hiking and running sort of clubs where people go with him up into the mountains. He's from Utah. He lives in California now, I assume. But started building a community around this, and people with like the don't die, I don't know if it's a hashtag, but signs, whatever.
And they don't talk about it much in the movie, but he did write a book, which I think was part of this movement. The book is called the same thing, Don't Die. So I don't think it was just purely his social media presence with this following. I think it was a combination of things.
That in the book. But in the end, he did actually look happy. Like there was joy when he was meeting with these people and cheering them on. Like that's when I felt like, okay, he seems to have some joy in his life now, hopefully, because his son's like said going away and he lives his solitary life. So it was interesting. It was very shocking. I hadn't known much about him or anything about him prior to this.
Yeah. There's another part that stands out, which you may talk about when you get to your, medical deep dive on it. But when somebody comes to visit him at his house and like tries his green drink and tries, his diet and everything. And the guy says to him, like, aren't you hungry? And he says, I'm always hungry. The saddest part of my day is my last bite. And I was like, that's not healthy either.
That doesn't feel good.
Yeah.
Balance
and even when he
everything.
says it, it's like kind of joking, but the guy he says it to is like, you could tell he's kind of like, what do I do with that?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and I'm not sure if you'll touch on all of this, but is there a piece of body dysmorphia involved in this?
So I didn't talk about it too much because I don't think I saw enough symptoms or enough explicit things to quote unquote diagnose or say like, hey, all signs are pointing to this. I definitely think there's some stuff going on there. So shall I just take it away about what I'm going to talk about?
Take it away.
So I kind of go through each thing that I feel like led him to this life change in this journey. So something that he only really briefly talks about is being part of the Church of Mormon or Mormonism. And so there's a lot of misconceptions about Mormonism. We don't learn too much about his individual church and his involvement other than his whole family was involved in it. And he appears to have at some point in the midst of his career kind of had like a spiritual crisis. Again, he doesn't go into detail, but what I'm assuming just based on the information he was giving is he was probably giving a lot of his life to work. And being a Mormon from the traditional standpoint, it does require a lot of time, a lot of service, a lot of going to church, attending these meetings, being with your other church members. And so he was probably struggling with kind of being pulled in both directions. He doesn't really talk about why he started to have his crisis of faith, but many people do, regardless of what religion they're in. But Mormonism, from what I could find in general, it is a type of Christianity, even though they have their own religious text, the Book of Mormon. But most people largely consider it a type of Christianity. The Church of Latter-day Saints is a type of Mormonism. So not all Mormons are LDS, but all LDS are Mormons, if that makes sense.
And then, of course, we're not going to go to this today, but there's that whole offshoot of the polygamy and
which that happens more in LDS and not in all LDS, just certain LDS
stuff. But I do feel like, and I'm not knocking anybody's religion. Everyone do what makes you happy, kind of a thing, as long as you're not hurting anyone. But my impression as an outsider is that it's fairly restrictive.
So there are certain things that are blatantly restrictive. So they do have to engage in missionary work, which many religions do. So that's not unusual. But they have very strict rules about abstinence from coffee, from alcohol, from premarital sex. And historically, they had been against people of questioning their sexuality and of other races. So in the past, originally, Mormonism was strictly for white members, for heterosexual members. It seems like there is some progression moving away from that, but I think it really, much like any other religion, depends on the individual church you're in and how strict they are. But they have been known, I believe it wasn't until the late 1970s that they allow African American members in the Church of Mormonism.
But the whole thing is, well, I'm basing this on the Broadway show Book of Mormon,
which I did not see, so I don't know.
Oh my God, it's the best. Yeah, I don't know if it's still running, but it's amazing. But they go to Africa to convert people.
So that's part of missionary work, is you're going to go to other places. And that's missionary work for any religion.
But I'm saying missionary work, but
people.
We want you to believe it, but you can't be in it because your color.
Right. Yeah. But you know what? I mean, not to knock all the religions, but in the Catholic religion, Christian religions, we've done the same thing where we've gone to other countries.
Oh, yeah.
Tried to convert people, but then necessarily it was more like a colonialism sort of thing.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
It can get real messy and dirty, and that's not what we're here to talk about today. Nope. And again, in this documentary, he doesn't speak ill of being a Mormon at all.
No.
He just kind of says that he was at this point in his life where the church really wasn't for him for whatever reason. And that was really difficult for him because his family was so enmeshed in the church. And that is something that is very common in Mormonism, in LDS, is that, your whole family is involved in it. Everyone your whole community is there. And when you choose to walk away from that, you're walking away from all of these social connections as well, which can be really painful for a lot of people. And so I think that was kind of the beginning of these crises that he seemed to have kind of one after another. The spiritual crisis of not necessarily belonging or identifying with those church values anymore, but then in stepping away and trying to find his own way, losing his community, losing his family, losing his children, and essentially having kind of like a midlife crisis. I don't think they say exactly how long ago it's been since he left the church, but it's been long enough that he's missed a large chunk of his children's lives, his children growing up and things like that. He also doesn't say exactly when his divorce happened, but my feeling was it probably happened in the midst of him leaving the church. I'm sure that was maybe the final straw, if not a big part of it. He did say that he worked a lot, so I'm sure he wasn't always home for his children and his wife, which can cause a lot of tension and difficulty, especially because I believe they have 4 children.
Right. I believe there were 4, but just the one he has the relationship with now.
And so whatever the details may be, which honestly are none of our business, even though he did a documentary,
it's your
some
life.
People, it's his life. But he was going through some sort of spiritual crisis, definitely difficulty with a work-life balance, which he does talk about a bit more. And there's going to be a bunch of links in the show notes. One, just the basics of what Mormonism is. I really like it because it's an article from CNN, so it kind of takes out any judgments and it's just factual. Like, the Mormon church says this, they do this, they don't do this. So I like it because it gives you an unbiased, just kind of info graphic essentially on what being a Mormon is. And then I added some stuff in there about this is not an actual diagnosis, but spiritual depression. So that's when you go through some sort of spiritual crisis, awakening, a shift from what you've been raised as, and then the difficulty that you have after that, kind of managing your life being totally different or your view on life being totally different. And in this one article, they say that it's kind of akin to people who have like a near-death experience where all of a sudden your worldview is wildly shifted and other people just don't get it because they haven't had that shift in their mindset.
This is typically more of a sudden, I guess, change.
So it can be sudden or it can be gradual. I think probably more people, and this is just an assumption, but I'm thinking more people, it might be gradual. You know, you start to question things that your church is teaching or question practices, and then maybe start to explore a little where I think other people, maybe if something tragic happens or something abusive happens, maybe then it's, you know, flipping a switch. And everybody, you know, they come to question their spirituality in different ways and different reasons. It doesn't always have to be traumatic. It could just be like, hey, I just, you know, met this really cool guy. They're not the same religion as me, and I think he's cool. So maybe I need to start looking out there.
Yeah, it's interesting. This is just on and off topic, but like growing up Catholic school our whole lives.
Yep. Well, I actually didn't go to Catholic school my whole life. I didn't start Catholic school till 5th grade.
Oh,
so that was an unusual shift for me.
Wasn't that Catholic?
Yeah, that was 5th grade. That was my first year in Catholic school.
I thought, for some reason I thought it was like that and then St. Joe's. But, you know, bottom line is like that sort of envelops like sort of, and then we went to Catholic high school, which was pretty,
our high school was progressive. Progressive.
Yeah, I was going to say liberal, but that's not the right word, progressive compared to others. And so I just never really pictured my life any other way because we were raised in this tradition. My family,
I think a lot of people feel that way.
Right. Like it was more about a tradition for me and sort of just like these rites that you go through. And that's why we got married in the Catholic Church, but we have not raised our children religious.
Right.
So it's an interesting thing. It was more about tradition and patterns and things you do for me than it was that. So that was not necessarily a crisis by any means as far as it was just like dwindling out of that being part of my everyday life.
Yeah. And I would say, I think at some point I definitely had more of a spiritual crisis when, you know, the things that we've seen everywhere about abuses in the Catholic Church came to light. And I found out that I knew some people personally who were victimized. And that was when I started to question things. But even with that in mind, I still have also very, very loving and warm memories of being involved in the Catholic Church or youth groups or things like that. So I think it's very individualistic. It's how everyone feels. But I feel lucky that I can look back at both the good and the bad and have kind of a balanced opinion on things.
I agree. Yeah.
Which I don't think everybody necessarily has when they have that sort of spiritual crisis, especially when it's in a negative manner, like I was made aware of.
Right.
So I don't want to take too much time up on that. So work-life balance, like you alluded to, he kind of throws off this statement that, you know, he was working more hours than he was at home or sleeping. And this part, I just kind of laughed a little because it made me think that he really is kind of out of touch with the average Joe out there. But he's like, oh, well, CEOs, we have to work all these hours. I'm like, I know people who wash floors who work like 80 hours a week. Like, you're not alone, sir. Like, it's not a rich man problem. I think it's part of our society, you know, this.
It is
working to live, not living to work, not working to live. And there's a lot of factors to it. But he clearly had an imbalance in his work and life. And he talks about how that was really making him feel depressed, making him feel suicidal. And then there's a really interesting study that I put in the show notes. I believe it's from, basically talks about the negative effects of work-life balance, which everyone knows happens, but there's actually studies specific to what happens when you're working too much and not having enough downtime or enough rest. And some of the major things can be heart disease, anxiety, depression, suicidal thoughts, poor health because you're not eating right, you're not exercising. So, you know, working too much, whether or not we can control it, it definitely impacts our bodies and our minds. So it sounds like he was really struggling with that. I would not be surprised if he was in such a position where he could choose his own hours and was choosing to work more, maybe for the greater good of his company. You know, it could have been for very good reasons, but it was really catching up with him quickly and making him feel quite low. So that's Work-life balance, I don't feel like that's rocket science. Everybody gets it. You work too much,
Right.
you're going to be miserable.
Right.
Suicidal ideation. Again, I don't feel like I need to go in detail. Everybody knows what that is. It's when you have thoughts about suicide, about death. And he is very frank about having those thoughts and wanting to die. He doesn't talk about any specific plans or intention, but definitely he was in a very, very low spot and he didn't want to be there. Which I think that is not talked about enough in the documentary. That he was so low that he felt that way, but he wanted to fight back. Right. And I wonder if some of that energy, some of that passion that he used to kind of pull himself up out of that black hole is what's motivating him now because he's afraid of getting back there.
I mean, right. So we can criticize the extremity of like how extreme things are, but it's true. Like we don't know what he felt, and if this is what it needed, like you said, to pull him out and to keep pushing him forward, then that's what he needed.
Yeah. And he said he was feeling that low for several years. So, I do want to say it's commendable for him to move through that struggle for years and then be able to turn his life around. Do I think maybe he overcorrected a little? Probably. But, he didn't end up taking his life, which I think so many people don't realize that it's not an easy decision and it's not something that most people are happy to do. If you're at that point where you're thinking about killing yourself, you're not a happy person.
No, and all the repercussions that would come along with that for his family and his children. So I think it maybe this isn't the most slightly dysfunctional, but it's still a much, much, much better choice.
Absolutely. And so then I'm glad that you brought up his family, because I think one of the things that stood out to me most in the documentary was his relationship with his son, Talmadge. And from a psychological lens, any of you guys out there who've studied psychology or know much about it, it is very clear that there's some parental enmeshment going on there. So do you know what parental enmeshment is?
No, I was excited to hear words that I don't know what they are. I even have a sneak peek at some of your future things we're doing, and I was like, ooh, these are things I don't know. I'm excited to learn.
So at the core, enmeshment is a type of attachment. So you might have learned in Psych 101 or maybe way back in high school with Miss Lynch now.
Oh, shout out Miss Lynch. We need to tag her.
Love her.
Well, Miss Lucich when we had her. Okay.
Yes, but Miss Lynch now. I know that we at least in one day covered the attachment patterns that children and parents develop. And so I'm not going to go too deep into it, but enmeshment between a mother and a child and a father and a child can be very different, mostly, especially here in the U.S., because there's different gender roles, parental roles. But the attachment between a parent and a child often predicts how that child moves about in the world, how they trust others, how they behave. So it's kind of like your first relationship. And enmeshment is not always a bad thing. You can have a healthy enmeshment, you can have a positive enmeshment, or you can have more of a toxic one. And what I think is happening in this documentary is, I think, my perspective, I don't have anything to back this up, is that Brian was so devastated by losing his children that when Talmadge came back into his life, he was all in. He was in 1,000%. He was in all 4 kids to this one kid. And he was going to be desperate to hold on to this boy because he loves his kids.
Yeah.
He loves his kids. He misses them. For whatever reason, they're not in his life. And now that he's got one back, he's holding on. But I think the problem is that we see in little tiny pieces where, unless you know what negative enmeshment is or toxic enmeshment is, you might miss. So one of the things that was like a glaring neon sign to me was when the interviewer in the documentary asks Talmadge a question and Brian answers. He doesn't even let him answer the question.
Yeah.
And both of them don't seem to realize that it happened. And that is pure enmeshment, where it's like this relationship is so connected and it's happened and it's so deep and it's so all-encompassing that you don't even realize that someone else is speaking for you.
Do you see that happen, though, in practice with families? Because I definitely do.
I mean, and sometimes it's harmless. Like, I think the perfect example is if I'm seeing a child for evaluation and the mom brings him in and the mom is like, well, we have problems with this. And I'm like, do we? I think your child might have problems with this, but you have problems with this. And sometimes parents get really defensive about it. But I explained to them, I was like, if you're not helping your child own their experience, you're not helping them.
Right. I do find, though, that I'll look at and make eye contact with the patient and ask a question, and their sister or mother or child or spouse will answer. And I'm like, I'll continue to try and make eye contact and ask the question directly to the person. But I do feel like there is like some weird relationship thing, and I want to help people to speak up for themselves.
Right. And I want to say again, for probably the 100th time, enmeshment isn't always a bad thing.
Right.
But it can become difficult when people are no longer differentiating one for the other. So like I said, Brian speaks for Talmadge. There's another point where they're in the gym and they're working out, and he's like, I wish I had Talmadge's legs. And then he says something else like, I want to live the next 300 years with Talmadge. Like, that's where it's starting to get, it's starting to cross that line between I'm just a dad who's trying to make up for lost time and I love my son to I'm obsessed with my son. I want to be my son. I think at one point at the interviewer asked, do you want to be Talmadge? And he kind of laughs.
And if you look at actually how his facial features and his aesthetics changed, now he looks more like the son than he ever did in the older pictures.
And in some of the shots of them, he actually looks younger than Talmadge, who is
17. Right.
By the way.
And what's going to happen when he goes to college? I mean, I want the kid to live life, you know?
Yes. But no, I definitely had that worry for both of them of what happens when he goes away. What happens to Brian when Talmadge isn't there 24/7? What was he like before when he wasn't there? None of them speak about that.
No.
None of them talk about that. And it's funny that that woman who's like his assistant, she says, oh, well, I was worried about Talmadge coming in. I didn't know how Brian was going to be able to share his life. And then it's like this 360 switch. And it's like, now he's sharing so much of it. And how much of this is healthy for a 17-year-old? We don't know if it's healthy for a 47-year-old.
Right. Are they having social interactions outside of this relationship?
Yeah. And then there was a lot of red flags between the two of them. But when they're on the plane and they're going to get that medical experiment and he's like, well, what is he eating back there? He's 17 years old. Let the boy eat a hamburger if he wants to. Like, it's not going to kill him. He works out 30 hours a day like you do. Like, calm down. But there's a lot of stuff in there. And like I said, I'm trying to look at it from the lens that Brian is presenting. And I think it is coming from a good place. I think he missed his son. He's so grateful to have him back. But like many of the other things he's doing, he's just going overboard. He's going way too far from that.
Yeah.
And then as far as the other relationship that's really majorly featured, is Brian's relationship with his father. Right. I feel terrible. I didn't write down his dad's name, but he was a nice guy.
I don't remember. He seemed like a nice guy.
Sweet guy. But the father says at one point that, when he was younger, when Brian was younger, he was a pretty severe alcoholic, and how he got sent to jail one night and Brian was the only one of his children who came to see him.
I had forgotten about that part. Yeah.
And what that really struck me as is something that's, very well known in the public. There's a lot of studies about, so there'll be some links in the show notes, is there are full organizations about children of alcoholic parents and how devastating that is to their relationship with their parent, with other people, their view of themselves. And so I think they were just kind of really just scratching the surface on that. But I think from Brian's dad's perspective, I think everything that he's doing in this documentary is because he's trying to make up for how he failed Brian.
Right.
And I think maybe Brian is overcompensating with Talmadge, saying, well, my dad's trying to fix it with me. I got to fix it with Talmadge before it's too late.
Yeah. Well,
because the one
sad,
thing that
but
Brian,
like happy at the same time. They're trying. They're all trying.
Exactly. And, the photo shoot in the pool and on the golf course was weird.
That was weird.
But it was also like, oh, like, look, these like three guys like, love each
bros.
Other. Yeah, they're bros. It's weird that they had to be like wet in the water about it, but whatever. But I think the point of that was, at least my impression from the documentary, was that Brian's dad was like, I still have a lot to compensate for. I have a lot to repair in our relationship. And if doing this is going to make him happy, plus get me further connected with my grandson, I'm going to do it.
Yeah.
Which, you know what? I feel like I don't think the documentary gave it enough justice, but in our society, men don't always necessarily embrace their emotions like that, especially love for each other. So I thought that was a really sweet moment for the three of them.
Yeah, it was cute.
Even though they're exchanging plasma.
Exchanging on the deeper level.
Yeah, there's a lot on that one. And then, again, none of them talk about it, but it sounds like maybe there was some trauma related to the dad/grandfather's alcoholism, in the childhood. We don't know. Was he an abusive alcoholic? Was he an absent alcoholic? Like, we don't know the details, and they don't owe us anything. But what they talk about feels like there's a lot more under the surface that was leading to them needing this repair of their relationship. And then, because I don't want to talk forever, just two other points. We know based on his own self-report, Brian's not the best with relationships.
Yeah.
So what they glaze over, and I wanted so much more information because, I love good gossip. I want to know what happened with this ex-girlfriend.
Yes.
Who then had cancer, and then he got rid of her because she was like zero profit or something.
Oh, yeah.
I was like, what does that mean? Like, where did that come? Did he actually say that, or was that like a misquote?
Did he pay for something with her treatment?
So what they said was that when they got together, I don't think they were engaged, but it sounded like they were very, very serious. And he basically was paying for her entire lifestyle. And then she got sick. And he said that he would pay for her treatment, but that they would no longer be in a relationship. And then, these podcasters, radio hosts are then kind of making assumptions about why that split happened. But apparently there was a court case about it. So,
right. I think for him to continue to pay for her lifestyle.
No, to pay for her treatment.
Her treatments.
Yeah.
Okay.
Which I don't really know how that would go over with a judge, especially if you're not married and unless they had, some sort of contract signed and...
Yeah. I don't know where common law falls into all that and how long that...
Right. And I believe they're in... You said Utah, but I thought they were in California.
No,
so
I think he's in California now. I think he was in Utah with his
That makes
family.
sense because that's a big capital for Mormonism, isn't it?
Right.
Yeah.
Wow.
So yeah, that they didn't go into too much, which is fine because, again, none of our business. That's why I love a documentary because I want to know everybody's business.
But it is. You put it out there. Come on, tell me more.
Well, maybe she didn't consent to being in the documentary.
Well, I agree. And that's why the ex-wife, too. Like, there was very little because I'm sure they don't want.
Yeah. And that was where I felt a little sorry for Brian. It seems like all the relationships that really meant something to him, the only people willing to speak about it were his parents and his son.
Right.
And it seemed like he had a pretty big group of people at one point.
I guess through his work life and all that, building the companies. Yeah, it seemed like, and through his church at that time, obviously. But yeah, that's all gone.
Yeah. And so I do think that something at the one point when he was talking about how he was messaging on like Tinder or whatever with this new girl and he like warned her what she was getting into. I have nothing to back this up, but it was just the way that he spoke about it. I was like, he doesn't know how to have a relationship.
No.
It just felt very like business transactional.
Yeah.
He's like, I told her, what she's in for. And even his son said something like, well, good luck with that. Like, that's not going to work out.
Right.
So. But I think that goes back to what I was alluding to before, is if he is so dedicated with this Project Blueprint and his body and his something I'm not even going to go into because I could not. But the line he says about how the brain is dead, the mind is dead, and the mind doesn't exist. And that's how he's able to focus on his body is by ignoring his mind.
What does that mean, though? What's the point?
And we know that we can't separate the mind or the brain from the body. They are inherently connected.
Absolutely.
But I feel like in turning off his mind, per se, he's not really shutting off emotions because you see how connected he is to his son. You see how connected he is to the cause, to meeting these new people. So have you really turned your mind off, or do you just tell yourself that to make it easier when your mind says, I want a fucking cheeseburger, and then you're like, no, let me turn my mind off. Because he makes early on, he says something about how everything negative that we do to ourselves is controlled by our mind.
Yeah.
Which there is some merit to that. But then he also made that comment about how when you drive to work, you pass 6 fast food places. Like, yeah, but my mind didn't create those 6 fast food places.
Right. They exist.
That's a societal thing.
Yeah.
So,
I don't know.
Yeah, I wasn't going down. And then the last thing I was going to talk about, because I was sure that you were going to ask about it, was the idea of an addictive personality.
Yes.
So there's a lot of controversy in the field about it. People who are true believers in addiction and addiction medicine and healing from addiction say that there is no such thing as an addictive personality. There's no such thing as a replacement addiction. But in real life, we know that we see it happen with people.
Yeah.
And it doesn't always have to be a negative addiction. I mean, you and I both know people who maybe haven't taken the best care of themselves and then kind of go overboard the other way, much like Brian did, not to the extent that he does. And I've seen it, sometimes you need to do that reckoning and say, okay, I don't like where I'm at. I need to fix things. But then it becomes an obsession, or it becomes an addiction, or something like that. And I think it happens to enough people out there that we can't say it doesn't happen.
Yeah, I mean, it seems to me like it's replacing something. It makes sense to me. I can picture and I can come up with examples in my head of other people I've seen do something similar. And
or even like negative things. Like there's like the old joke that like everybody in AA either smokes or drinks coffee. Yeah, because those are replacements for the addiction for the negative, the more negative substance.
Absolutely. Like I'll even talk to patients like, all right, you've stopped drinking or you've stopped using opioids. Yes, we'll talk about your cigarettes, but I'm not going to harp on this right now because you've already done a lot of work.
And that's what they say in the treatment facilities is like, if that's the worst that you're doing, that's so much better than where you were. Sometimes we almost foster these replacement addictions. But for me, it's proving that there is something chemically in the brain that is wanting more and more and more and an obsession with something. And then you just find the thing that fits for you. For some of us.
And we see, well, and that would make sense.
It's exercise. For some of us, it's drugs. You know, it happens to so many people.
And we know that these things are genetic. We absolutely see that. Obviously, the father with his alcoholism, like this could be a different version of that. Obviously, a much more healthy version, but is it detrimental to his mental health or not? You know, this jury's still out. But yeah.
I will say the one like main kind of controversy in the field is that when someone has an addiction to, say, opioids, there is no replacement for an opioid.
Right.
So they're like, well, then there's no replacement addiction. But maybe having that, I don't want to say stability, having something to rely on to help you through something. So now you're not using opioids, but now you're smoking cigarettes. It's maybe that psychological replacement of an addiction where, your body's not getting it, but you're still doing something. Because that's what it is. That's what an addiction is. It's a habit that no longer serves you and now is working against you.
Right.
So you start instituting these other habits.
Right. Interesting.
So that's what I've got for, I mean, I feel like I covered the main points, but if there's other points, I can just make stuff up on the fly. I'm good.
Well, if I hit anything else with throughout mine. So I'm just going to touch on some of his things in his protocol because I talked about like he does these supplements, he does this, but there's some other things that he does that are actual medical interventions that he's using sort of in an off-label way.
Yes, I was fascinated by those.
Extend his life. So number one is growth hormone. So we all have growth hormone. That's what tells our bodies to grow. And there's a lot of wellness sort of woo on growth hormone and people trying to use it off-label. And it's essentially what he's doing. But your pituitary gland is what produces it. And as you get older, after puberty, it slowly makes less and less. And, there are lab-made...
Just from my own understanding, is this the same thing as HGB or is that different?
HGB is no, that's a little different. But it's HGH, hormone growth hormone. So basically, there is lab-made human growth hormone for children who have a growth deficiency. They see an endocrinologist, they get worked up. They're not growing on their curve, not just because their parents are tiny, but because they're just not following the curve because they have a deficiency. So fine, there is a medical pharmaceutical compound that replaces that. But people are trying to use it to delay some of the changes linked to aging, as specifically muscle and bone mass. There's little research, there's not a lot to show that healthy adults can retain like youth and energy. It has mixed results. It appears that it does boost muscle mass and lower the amount of body fat, but the gain in muscle doesn't actually change your strength. And there's just not clear-cut, studies that prove it one way or another. And we always have to think about that our hormones, and we talk about hormones in a lot of ways, but this is one of our hormones, that they're in a perfect balance because that is how our body was designed. There's such a thing as too much of a good thing. So there can be risks. There are actual medical conditions called gigantism and acromegaly that are because of too much hormone growth hormone. So of course there could be. Yeah. So, but other things that it can be caused if you're supplementing it, not medically. Carpal tunnel syndrome, high blood sugar, it can actually cause diabetes, edema, which is swelling, pain in the joint and muscles, gynecomastia, which is actually growth of breast tissue, typically in a man, and it can have higher risk of certain cancers. So again, mixed studies. He's being followed by this quote unquote longevity doctor who also looked very young to be an expert in anything. But maybe he's on the protocol, so maybe he's actually older than we think.
Are we talking about the guy hope he went to the other country for? Because that guy was
No. In the very beginning, there's a guy he does like a Zoom call with. Yeah. He's the one who invented the blueprint.
So
another
other
thing,
guy was like 28. He was like, really?
Yes,
dude?
I know. We'll get to him. So then the other thing that he's using is something called Rapamycin, which I had to actually look up. But basically, it does affect your physiologic parameters with aging, immune, cardiovascular, skin of healthy individuals or individuals with age-related diseases. But it's been proven to help certain things, but it does not change your endocrine, which is hormones, muscular or neurologic symptoms. And there's no studies how it affects your respiratory, digestive, renal, which is kidney, or reproductive systems. They don't actually show too much negative from this. Could be a forefront. If it helps with your immune and cardiovascular, that could be something. The only thing they found that was an issue was it did increase cholesterol levels in patients who already have age-related diseases, but not in healthy individuals. So I guess the idea would be to start this young before you have those issues. Again, no concrete studies on this, but this one didn't have as many known risks as the others. Next thing he's using is Metformin, which is sort of the bread and butter of diabetes. We've been using Metformin for literally 60 years, and it is a very safe drug. It does help with glucose tolerance in patients who are pre-diabetic, patients who have polycystic ovarian syndrome, and the patients who are actually diabetic.
Aren't there side effects with it, though, or am I confusing it?
Yes and no. So most common side effects are GI upset, bloating, diarrhea. You have that, we don't use it. It does have weight loss benefits. Should not use it in patients whose kidney function, it's a number called GFR, is below 60. Not because metformin hurts the kidneys, but because if in patients with a low GFR, it could cause something called lactic acidosis. So generally, you just stop it if the patients have low kidney function. There are studies showing that there are some beneficial effects in reducing the risk of aging-related diseases like neurodegeneration and cancer in mice. So it's definitely something that there is more attention to it. I'm sure there are active studies on it for anti-aging in humans. And on the surface, it seems like it is justified to study it because it is safe and tolerable, has a lot of, data for many, like I said, 60 plus years.
So I have a question that you may not know the answer to. So I know back in the day, and we don't do this now for many, many reasons, but first line, they would experiment on mice. Then they would move up to rats. Then they would move to monkeys. But I know we no longer experiment on monkeys. So what is the in-between, or is it just straight mice to human trials?
I don't know because I don't work in research. We have a lot of information on mice because there's a lot of things about mice and their physiology and anatomy that matches humans. I'm sure there are other intermediate things, but basically we know this drug, it's been used on humans forever. It's just the question, does it have that effect in improving their anti-aging or not? I just don't think there's ever been really a reason to do that particular study, but I think there are people who are doing it now.
Well, and I think one guy in the documentary talks about that is like there's other things you could be studying to help with longevity and health, but he's jumping to like these extremes and there's no studies out there, and it's like, what's the point? Because it's not going to be a generalizable study.
Right. It's not something we're going to take to everybody and be able to use. And so we don't even know particularly what the mechanism of action is in aging. We know how metformin works for diabetes and other things. We don't know how it helps with aging. So they need big scale, randomized placebo-controlled trials to really do something. And that would have to be along many, many years if we're looking at aging. So I'm not sure how that would be or if there is a point to it.
Right. And the other thing that comes up, which maybe you're going to talk about, is I think it's the same doctor. He says that Brian's using so many different extreme techniques that how do we even tell which one is working and which one isn't?
Right. I mean, we can't have an N of one. We can't have just him as a study. He's not a study. He's one individual who's using multiple
But
variables.
even for himself, how does he know that, the 13th pill he's taking is the one that's helping versus the pill?
Exactly. I guess whoever this longevity consultant is has pulled studies from each of those individual things, is hoping for a layered on.
It just seems like really messy research, but I guess.
Yeah, I don't think it's research. I think he's just a rich guy who wants to try it. There can't be a study on him. There's too many variables. But we talked a little bit about the plasma therapy. So it's interesting. So plasma is a part of your blood. So when we take out the blood cells and all these things, there's plasma.
And that's what you get paid the most for when you donate.
Yeah. I haven't gotten paid to donate. I've actually never donated blood for various reasons, but
I know that plasma pays the most.
I did hear that you can make money on it. So it is used medically for specific reasons in a hospital setting. It is also used topically in aesthetics and joint injections. But the IV infusion is of a younger donor is what he's doing. So there are animals.
I was going to say, they went in depth on that one with the mice, and they showed how they literally sewed the two mice together.
Where did he fly to? He flew to somewhere to have this done.
A special island that is a republic that has its own name.
Yeah.
Called it was Regenera or some weird name like that.
So it was somewhere
off the coast of Colombia? No, Costa Rica? Somewhere that starts with a C. It was off the coast.
It might have been near Costa Rica, if that sounds right. But the point being, I guess it was somewhere that they didn't have the legal and FDA.
Yeah, because it was a privately owned island. So basically they didn't have to follow certain rules.
Right.
Which is shady AF.
Right. So, plasma is the acellular, no cell component of blood. And there are some studies that show that aging is malleable and it can restore some function in old animals. So functional improvement is observed in the brain despite the blood-brain barrier, which things are not supposed to cross. So they're saying that there's some sort of...
I'm sorry, I'm laughing. I just pictured Gandalf. Thou shalt not pass. The blood-brain barrier. Sorry.
That is the blood-brain barrier. It is pretty much like if something crosses it, it's not good. I mean, drugs cross it, but infection, bacteria, viruses, we don't want those. I mean, alcohol crosses it. So, I mean, I guess we're promoting.
I think that's why I thought of it just now. Because alcohol crossed it.
But basically, they're saying that maybe its effect on the periphery of your body maybe impacts centrally, but they're not, again, really sure. There's no clinical proven benefit that the plasma of a young donor prevents aging, memory loss.
And this was that really bizarre picture they showed where they sewed the baby mouse to the grown-up mouse. Right? Yeah. I'm thinking of the right part.
Yes. I forgot about that. I'm thinking of blocking things out.
I mean, that was just so bizarre to me. Like, that's how you figured out how to do the experiment? You couldn't put little IVs to the mice? You had to sew them together?
Yeah, just wait. I think in episode, what am I working on? Episode 11, there's going to be some animal stuff.
We're sewing people together?
Not quite that, but some experiments. But in the end, it worked out. But anyway, so there's nothing really showing for sure that it does anything for memory loss, dementia, Parkinson's, MS, Alzheimer's, PTSD. But, and the dosing of this can involve large volumes. It's not guided by any evidence. There's no controlled trials. And there are risks because you are taking blood products from a person. Infectious, allergic. Like we talked a little bit about the compatibility with blood, although we're not talking about blood cells in the same way. You can still have an immune reaction.
So if you're exchanging plasma, you don't have to be the same blood type.
Right. But you can still have an immune reaction to almost anything. Mm-hmm. So there are risks. Again, not enough information. That's kind of where all his stuff goes.
Yeah.
And then the big one is the gene therapy.
Yeah.
Which
that was kind of shady.
Let's define what gene therapy is. And there's a lot that I don't know about this because this is not part of my everyday practice.
Well, I also felt like they purposely left out specifics of it, probably because it's not on the up and up.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. They glazed over a whole lot of it. Basically, the definition of gene therapy, or what it refers to, is the introduction of a exogenous, so from outside your body, complementary DNA into a specific tissue or cell to correct or compensate for a defective endogenous made by you.
So for those of you who watched the documentary, this is when he flew to another country to get a shot in his stomach.
Yes, exactly. So there is advancing gene therapy in certain cancers, in certain immunologic issues. I mean, there's definitely research. It's a forefront of research. But the goal is to modify the genetic information responsible for a disease. So it types of gene therapy, there's a couple different ways. So that's a very general term. Gene replacement was the original strategy, which refers to replacing a pathogenic, so bad gene with a copy of a healthy gene. Or
when
replacing...
would that be used? Would it be like with someone who has Down syndrome, or where there's like a clearly defective gene or broken gene?
So a lot of this depends on where or what you're replacing, right? So your whole body, every single cell in you has your entire genetic code, right?
Yeah.
But only certain things are expressed in each cell, right? Like, so my skin cells not making kidneys and my kidney cells aren't making skin.
Are you sure?
So there are complexities to this that are literally beyond my pay grade. We're not looking, we can't, if we haven't changed your entire somatic DNA, everything in your entire body, we can't take away an entire syndrome, right? So these are targeted. So
I was just going to ask you a question that was really going to throw you off. It's like, are we targeting any RNA or just DNA?
So there is a
know,
mention of this. You're getting me, like, this is not my thing, but I'm learning.
You're not talking to a fool over here. I know that.
I know. They did say that there is modification of mRNA at that level, because mRNA can transmit genetic information. So they're working with that as well. Often these are used with viral vectors. They're using a virus to deliver it to you, like a killed virus. The other big thing you've probably heard about is CRISPR, CRISPR. So really, that's like the big word in DNA now,
Okay.
All us DNA people.
That's what I get for throwing out RNA.
It's an alternative to overriding the expression of the disease-causing gene. Basically, it is to directly eliminate the effect by altering... I'm going to try and read this and then try and break it down in real words.
Just
which is
read
hard.
The words off the screen.
So it's basically trying to produce precise on-target mutations or small things at the genomic level. So inserting a healthy or modified sequence and revising and taking away the bad sequence. So that's, again, that is not my field. There's
the only thing I can think of is in, like, if someone has like XXY, like getting rid of the additional X. But I don't even think that is because...
Right. Again, that's...
gender chromosomes are different than the others.
We're talking way down in like one little line on that little chromosome.
So maybe more of like, if someone has a genetic predisposition for insomnia, this kind of treatment might get rid of that predisposition, which may not have been expressed to begin with.
Right. All right. And that's where epigenetics and all these other things come into play. Epigenetic modification therapy is another thing that they're working on that alters the way the genetic information is expressed. So inactivating a disease-causing gene, like shutting it off. Activating an antagonist gene to fight the disease-causing genes. Because we have backup systems essentially in our body, things that are supposed to fight.
We all survive with all the things that could go.
It really is. So, basically there's a lot going on in this area. The one that he is using is this follistatin, which is to prevent in the gene therapy the goal is to prevent sarcopenia, which is the loss of muscle mass, which is something that happens as you get older. Your muscle mass goes down, your fat content goes up. There's definitely a shift. This follistatin is really being studied for things like muscular dystrophy. They extended, use of this into some non-primate monkeys, and they're working on a lot of this being potentially used for medical things. I think it is, like you said, he's using all these things. So he's also working out 1,000 times a day. Right. So if he gets more muscle or doesn't lose muscle, well, is that because of this injection, or is that because he works out constantly?
Well, the other thing I was thinking, speaking of him working out all the time, is yes, we are supposed to exercise to keep our bodies at optimum shape, but we see this from athletes. The more that you exercise, the more prone to injury you are. And so it doesn't seem like he's trying to find that happy medium.
Right. Yeah. Again, he just do his thing. He's never going to prove what did what in the end. right?
Well,
you
and
can't
that's what I was
prevent for
thinking.
everything.
Is like, unfortunately, at some point, this man is going to pass away because death is
We all
inevitable
do.
for all of us.
Right.
And so when that day comes, what has all of this proven to the world? Because he's not going to be able to live forever.
Right.
That is just an inalienable fact.
Exactly. So I'm just going to give you actually little stats on life expectancy. So
I don't want to know.
in the year 1000, our life expectancy
was 4 years.
24.
Not close.
Well, remember, it's an average of
how do we know?
Lows.
Who from back then recorded
that?
Yeah,
I don't know. I'm looking at Statistica, the average life expectancy for birth in the world and selected countries or regions between 1000 and 2020.
I don't know. Maybe they found it on a scroll somewhere on a big old tablet.
But, the point being, remember, we're averaging so many people died in childhood. So that doesn't mean that, right, you didn't live, you all lived to 24, somebody lived to 48 or whatever.
And I'm also assuming these statistics are for men because the mortality rate during childbirth for women is still quite high.
Yeah, true. And then they start to break off into more developed countries versus less developed countries. And that sort of splits in the 1800s. And it goes up to 36 in 1946. 1950, it was 64.83 in developed countries. 1999, it went up to 75.6. And in 2020, I guess pre-COVID, I'm assuming 79.24 in developed countries.
So I guess those statistics are on his side. Like, we are living longer anyway.
Exactly. We're living longer because of better access to food, better health care, immunizations, children making it past 1 year old, women not dying in childbirth. I mean, there's a lot of factors that go into this. So, I mean, between 1999 and 2020, it jumped like almost 4.5 years. That's
but like you said, with
fairly
COVID,
short period of
how
time.
far back did that slide?
Right. Yeah. I mean, I'm sure that statistically moved things back, but in general, because we live in this developed world and have all these access to things, it's going up.
Yeah. I just heard a statistic, and I'm probably quoting it wrong, so forgive me, everyone, but I was doing this training and they were saying that after COVID, the average life expectancy for African American males decreased by 4.1 years due to COVID.
Oh, wow.
So it's like, so if that's just one race of one gender, how is that impacting everyone? Like, clearly we know that there's disparities in healthcare, and so that was why that was being cited. But
yeah,
if that's just one person, what about Hispanic women? What about Asian transgender people? Like, how is that affecting everyone as a whole? And do we even have those?
I'm going to make a comment here. This might get rid of some of our listeners, but I don't think so. I think our people are like-minded. Well, they're no longer tracking that in the CDC, so we'll never know.
But we don't agree.
Let's just leave it at that.
We don't agree with that. We're just acknowledging that is something that is happening in the world.
Right. Yeah. I mean,
unfortunately.
I agree. Yeah. I mean, so was talk. I don't know if you ever saw, there was a documentary on the Blue Zones. That was on Netflix at some point, or one of those.
It sounds familiar, but I know I didn't watch it.
So the Blue Zones are these areas. It was made popular by this documentary that people live longer because of physical activity, low stress, social interactions,
involvement,
whole food diets, low disease incidence. And so
I don't think it's part of that documentary, but there's a documentary on how schizophrenia is different in the Blue Zones, which was fascinating.
Oh, wow. So the Blue Zones that we currently have identified is Okinawa, Japan, Sardinia, Italy, Nicoya, Costa Rica, Icaria, Greece, and Loma Linda, California, which is an interesting one.
Ironic. Isn't that right in the Silicon Valley?
Yeah. So they're questioning Okinawa now because there was a steep decline in longevity there.
I wonder maybe that
I wrote it somewhere. I don't remember why.
What happened? What?
I remember I read it, but I don't remember why. But basically, they're saying that it's because of a diet, the Mediterranean type diet, based on lots of fruits, vegetables, grains, legumes, less meat, less dairy, less sugary and processed foods. People tend to walk places, less cars, they're gardening, they're doing housework, they have very close social interactions. These tend to be very insulated communities, so they have very rich communities. They also have lower stress levels. Think about it in like Italy, you take a siesta, you walk down the street, have a, glass of wine with, your great grandma.
If only my license would transfer.
Seriously.
And my degree would transfer, but no.
If you see all these things, they're like, you can buy a house in wherever. We will pay you to come live here.
Yeah.
And so they say the people in blue zones have a sense of purpose in life. They tend to avoid alcohol or drink it in moderation, like red wine. And they tend to have reduced calories. And again, Mediterranean diet, vegetables, less potatoes, more fruits, nuts, whole grains, like we said, exercising, things like that. So it's interesting. There has been some controversy whether they really extrapolated this information correctly, but I do think there is something to that. We've all met like that Italian lady who lived to 95 who, just kind of like went through life because she just lived a simple life and didn't indulge in things. So I think Greece, Italy, I see it there. I'm not extrapolating data. I think that there's something to it, but I don't think I think they blew it up with this big theory and then they couldn't really prove it as well. There still exists a website though about the blue zones. So you can look that up. But things we can do 100% that have been proven in medicine is that Mediterranean diet. So again, vegetables, fruits, nuts, whole grains, legumes, fish, less red and processed meat, exercising 150 minutes a week of moderate. So we don't have to go crazy. We're not talking to doing like high intensity, crazy stuff.
Less than 30 minutes a day.
Right. Or 75 minutes a week if you're doing more vigorous. Or an equivalent combination. Don't smoke. Duh.
That's the only thing I could say I don't do.
Duh. Limit alcohol. So in the U.S., we say...
Listeners of our podcast, do not limit alcohol.
Well, we drink at our podcast once a week. What are you talking about?
Okay, sure.
In the U.S., we say less than 7 drinks a week per woman and less than 14 per man. And that would be, a drink would be 12 ounces of beer or 5 ounces of wine or 2 ounces, ounce and a half.
I think 2 ounces.
Shot, 2 ounces of hard liquor. Technically, if you go to WHO, they say there is no safe amount of alcohol, which is probably the actual truth. I think somewhere in the middle. I'm saying, 7 a week might be, 7 a week might be too much for a female.
I mean, I look at it this way. If it's something that could take the paint off a car or kill an animal, we probably shouldn't be ingesting it, but we do that with a lot of things. So
true. Get enough sleep. Hydrate. Socialize.
I'm the worst at that one.
Oh, really?
I have a beautiful water bottle in my desk. It's this big. It's 40 ounces. I took 3 sips out of it today.
There is I don't know her name, but this woman this Gen X woman on Instagram who does all these dances and songs and whatever. But she was talking about how everybody in the 80s and 90s was dehydrated because you'd go to school. That no one brought water bottles.
No.
You went out and sweated your ass off with a black
didn't
top.
Sell bottled water.
There wasn't such a thing. I didn't drink water. I drank juice and milk. Went out on the playground, like busted your ass in the hot ass pavement, went inside and had 3 seconds in line to drink from the water fountain before the kid behind you was kicking you.
You slid down that metal slide that was 700 degrees and you burned your legs.
So true.
And that is why our generation doesn't give up.
I went on that merry-go-round thing of death that you get like sucked under if you fell off.
We all knew at least one person who almost got kidnapped or who had a traumatic brain injury. We all did.
Did people sell us drugs? Wait, they were going to give us stickers or candy on the street? Yes. They were going to lick the drugs off, right?
Yeah. And then they put razor blades in our Halloween candy.
Right. I don't know.
But anyway, survived, so.
Hydrate. Be like us now, not like us in the 80s.
I don't hydrate now, so don't be like me now.
Get a big Stanley. They're very popular. The kids like them.
So many pretty cups, and I fill them with water and brand new ice from my ice maker, and then they sit on my desk.
Apparently Stanleys are out, though. Owalas are in. Yeah. I can't keep up with water bottle culture. Like kids, like water bottles are popular. I don't know.
Our parents don't know how lucky they had it.
Right? Socialize.
Patch kids were the most expensive thing.
Hey, you had to like beat people to get those.
My mother did.
Yeah, I had like first year. I think we still have her. I took her from my mom. She's in my basement somewhere. Oh no, I gave them to one of the kids, I think.
Oh.
But anyway, the whole point is, do the things we know are good for us. Don't do the things we aren't good for us.
And I tell people this all the time when I do feedbacks for evaluations. I give a bunch of beautiful recommendations, but I also know that, my doctor tells me not to eat sugar and to exercise. Do I do it? No, but I know that if I do it, I'm going to feel better. And so I say the same thing to my patients when I'm giving them recommendations about sleep hygiene or things like that. Are you going to do it? Be honest with yourself. If you're not going to do it, fine, but this is going to help. So this is how we try to institute these things.
Right. Exactly. And then just the last thing is I don't know, what's your opinion on what are the ethics of this? If we all live forever, we're going to run out of resources for the planet.
Okay. I'm not thinking of ethics. I'm thinking about the sci-fi fantasy question that is always in my mind is, if I was a vampire and lived forever, what would I do with myself?
Right. I mean, I'd read
all the books in the library, and then I'd be mad because I read all the books in the library. I'd see every movie ever made. All of my friends would be dead. If I got hungry, I had to kill somebody else. It's not a life. As much as really wanted me to become a vampire from Interview with the Vampire, it's just not the kind of life I'm looking to live.
Yeah, I mean, and also the financial disparity. Obviously, this isn't accessible for every single person. So this is only accessible to these Silicon Valley billionaires. And so they get to live forever and we don't.
Well, and the other thing, I mean, this is kind of a tangent, but not really. We see these movies and films and books about people who age backwards or who live forever. And the moral of every single one of those stories is that they're just unhappy. They're not living a fulfilled life.
I didn't ever see that Brad Pitt, Benjamin.
I didn't see Benjamin Button, but I did see The Age of Adeline with Blake Lively.
See, I can't believe we didn't see Benjamin Button. I feel like you would have, but no. So, I mean,
he lives a long time and ages backwards, apparently.
Yes. And he's also a vampire in Interview with the Vampire.
Oh, I thought you meant in that movie. I was really? Now I need to go up.
In real life.
I mean, look, I have suspicions a lot of people in Hollywood are vampires.
They're sparkly. Are they sparkly like the ones from...
Angela Bassett hasn't aged in the last 25 years. Whatever that woman's doing, Brian needs to call up Angela and be like, girl, what's up?
Wait, is she Stella who got her groove?
She's Stella. She was Whitney.
Yeah.
No, Whitney? No, Tina. She was Tina.
Tina Turner, yeah. Well, I mean, what's she doing out there?
She's living her best life.
There are a couple, Betty White, she lived for a very, very, very,
she lived to 99.
I did have a patient
problems and a bitch ain't one.
I did have a patient live to 100.
She was almost 100. She was going to turn 100, I think, a month later, and she died.
Aww. Yeah. So cute. But she did have that pretty face. She just had that angelic face.
And in her older age, we saw she didn't give a fuck. So
I do. I like that. Well, that's what you get to do when you get that old. You get to be like,
why do we have to wait? Do it now. You never know.
Yeah, I don't know. It's not in me. I have social cues and all that.
You have better social skills than I do, apparently.
I don't know. But, something to think about. Ethics about it, what that means. So it's an interesting topic. The whole thing was very interesting. I'm glad you brought it up and I watched it. And, it brought up a lot of interesting dives into what we can do, what we can't do, what we should do, what we shouldn't do.
Yeah. And I'm curious as to if they're going to continue to follow him or if this was kind of a one and done. Because at the very end, they talk about how since he had the gene therapy, he had a 3% gain in muscle mass and lost another half a year of his life. And it's what does that mean? How are we
measuring this? I don't even know how we're measuring this. I really don't.
Exactly. That's the other part. It's is this actual math or is this psychology math where the numbers don't have to make sense?
It's longevity math. All right, so that's another episode 8, done and complete. That's 2 months worth of episodes.
So guys, we've got a bunch of social medias that Tara's going to tell you about, but because I am in charge of following our Gmail box, I am sad that no one has emailed us. So someone please email us at medicalmediamixer@gmail.com just so I can say, we got an email. Because I check that thing all the time. No emails.
Nothing. All it is my crap from the subscriptions of the stuff for the podcast.
You can email and be like, I'm emailing you, and I will just be happy.
Yes, but seriously, give us shows to do a story on. Give us weird medical things you want us to talk about. Tell us you like us. Tell us you hate us. Tell us something.
Any feedback is feedback.
Seriously, we also have a survey up. I linked it on our Instagram and our YouTube, and it's also on our website. So let me give you our website as well.
Wait, we have a website?
Well, yeah, it's through our podcast hosting platform.
Guys, I did not know we had a website.
I link it on all the stuff that we do.
Don't read the links?
That's where that QR code takes you.
I show up and I talk. I don't read.
The QR code takes you to the website.
The link tree. Okay.
No, not the link tree. No, the QR code. Literally takes you to our website.
Clearly, I need to shut up. I don't know what I'm talking about.
So our website is https://medicalmediamixer.podbean.
You know the young ones don't say all that stuff anymore.
Oh, fine. But medicalmediamixer.podbean.com. So podbean.com. That has links to all the places you can listen to us. It has links to our social media and to our survey. And fill it out. Let us know what you like, what you don't, what we can improve on. And then, of course, follow us on social media. Interact with us. Seriously, like, put a comment on something. I will totally answer you.
I see a bunch of hearts. I'm loving that. I want some comments. Even if it's like, girl, you didn't put on makeup today. Like, whatever. As long as I know that you're interested in sharing with us.
We're your friends. Yeah. We want friends. I mean, we have each other, but that's what we have right now.
Tara has already found places for us to do live shows. So we need people who want to actually hear a live show.
And like we had like a really good boom, like, oh, thanks friends and family, because episode 1 had like 100 and something odd listens, but then episodes beyond that, it's dwindling. So come back, listen to more. Episode 1, we were just figuring ourselves out.
Yeah. And we were working on the audio stuff. We're working on length. We're working on
except for this one's like an hour and 25 minutes already, longest yet.
The goal of this was to be shorter. We were wrong. I apologize.
We were wrong.
I'm sorry, friends.
That's okay. But please tell a friend too.
Yes.
Every one person who listens.
Tell a stranger. We don't know if they're your friends.
Tell a stranger on the bus. Who takes the bus? Subway.
How many people take the bus?
I don't know. The subway.
On the train.
The train. Yeah. The train.
In line
in the
at
doctor's
Starbucks
office.
Or Dunkin'.
Totally Starbucks or Dunkin', for sure. I left some cards at my Pilates studio. So hopefully maybe some people there will listen. I started exercising 2 years ago.
Look at you.
I'm not going to live forever, but you know. All right. Yeah. Follow us on Instagram,
TikTok,
YouTube, and listen
everywhere
again.
You get your podcast.
Yes. All right. What do we say at the end?
Thanks for listening to Medical Media Mixer, the perfect cocktail.
Cheers.